Today we're going to show you how to install an amplifier into your UTV. Now in today's video we will be using the Rockville RXD F30 4-channel amplifier and the Rockville RWK 8 ATV wiring kit, but the principles and tips talked about in this video will apply to other UTV compatible amps and wire kits. Let's get to it. Step 1. The first thing we're going to want to do is lay everything from our amp kit out so we know exactly which wires we're dealing with in our install. We're going to start this install by preparing our amp for wiring. To do that, we're going to take the Allen keys included with our amp and first loosen all the speaker wire terminals here. And then we're going to loosen our power, remote, and ground terminals here. Now we're going to take our power wire, which is the thick light blue wire in our kit, and we're going to strip the end that does not have the fuse close to it. The end that has the fuse close to it will get attached to the battery terminal, but we'll get to that later. Once you have the wire stripped, run it into the amp terminal like this and then clamp it into place by screwing the Allen screw back into the terminal with your Allen key. Make sure you pull down the rubber shielding all the way to the edge of the wire going into the terminal. We're going to do the same thing with the ground wire now. Strip about 1 inch of ground wire, run it into the ground terminal on the amp, lock it into place with the Allen screw and Allen key, and pull the rubber shielding on the wire down. Now on the other end of the ground wire, we're going to strip some wire and crimp on an O-ring, which will make connecting to our battery terminal easier. Now we're going to take our remote line, which is the skinny dark blue wire here. Strip the wire and run it into the remote terminal on the amp between the power and ground terminal, and then lock it into place with the small Allen key. At this point, you can also run your speaker wire into your speaker wire terminals on your amp. Since this is a 4-channel amp, we ran 4 separate speaker wires into those speaker wire terminals and then tightened them up with our Allen key. In this video, we won't be connecting the speaker wire to anything, but rather setting ourselves up for an easier install for when we do. In our case, we are preparing for 4 speakers, 2 in the back of our UTV and 2 in the front panels of our UTV. But we'll get to that in another video. After you have all your wires in your terminals, you can prepare to mount your amplifier. Step 2. The next thing we're going to want to do is figure out exactly where we want to place our amplifier in our UTV. Now with an amp like the RXD F30 that is super compact, there are many options with where we can install it. When picking a location for your amplifier, you just want to think about having a clean path for your speaker wires, RCA cables, and power, ground, and remote lines to run. Whatever location you pick, you want to make sure that it's going to allow for all these wires to run smoothly and not get tugged on or disconnected because of where they are placed. On top of that, you also want to pick a location that is ventilated so it can help with keeping the amp cool. Just some things to think about. For our install, we chose to mount it right on the wall behind the passenger and driver seat. To do this, we had to attach the 4 mounting brackets onto our amplifier. This is done by taking 2 small screws that come with the RXD F30 and screwing them in, and then repeating the process for the remaining mounting brackets. Then we're going to take the longer Phillips mounting screws and use them to actually mount the amp onto the back wall of the UTV. Now that we have our amp mounted and wired up, we can move on to connecting our wires to our battery. Step 3. The first thing we want to do is locate where our battery is in our UTV. For us in our installation, it was under the driver's seat. But if your battery is in a different location, don't worry, the installation is still all the same. The first wire we want to connect is our ground wire to the negative terminal on our battery. Now we recommend disconnecting the positive and negative wires that are attached to the battery terminals before installing the amplifier's power and ground wires to them, to avoid sparking. We're going to take a wrench and loosen this nut that is connected to the screw on the negative terminal on the battery. Once we have the nut completely off, we can slide the ground wire O-ring over the screw like this, and then place the nut back on and tighten it so it sandwiches the O-ring on the screw. Make sure you tighten it all the way, you do not want any loose connections. We are going to do the same thing with our power wire. Now on the end not plugged into our amplifier, our power wire has an O-ring and a fuse. So now we can unscrew the nut on the positive terminal of our battery and place the power wire O-ring around the screw like this, and then screw the nut back on to sandwich it all together like this. For our remote line, we actually want to run it either into our ignition or to our accessory line on our UTV. This will ensure that when the UTV is off, the amp will not drain the battery, and once we turn our UTV on, it'll power up the amp. In our UTV, we had an accessory line under the hood, so we ran the remote line all the way from the amp through the dashboard and to the accessory line. To attach to the accessory line, we removed this nut over here on the accessory line with a socket wrench, and then once we had it removed, we took our remote line, which we added an O-ring to, and then just hooked it onto the bolt like this, and once it was on the bolt, we put the nut back on the accessory bolt and tightened it all into place. Now we have all the wires to power up the amp connected. We can also run our RCA cables that will bring music signal to the amp. We had two setups in mind when we were doing this install. One is with a soundbar and one is with an in-dash unit. In both cases, all you do is take your RCA cables and plug them into the RCA output of either your soundbar or head unit, and then find a clean path to run alongside the roll bars of your UTV to your amplifier. A quick note though, if you are not using high quality insulated RCA cables, a common tip is to not run your RCA cables on the same side you are running your remote, power, and ground line of your vehicle. But once you have that clear path determined for your RCA cables, you can plug them into your amplifier into channels 1 and 2. Now since this is a 4-channel amplifier, it gives us the capability to run 2 sets of RCA cables into the amplifier, so that if your UTV's head unit has fade between the right and left side of your vehicle and balance between the front and back of your vehicle, it'll be able to send that signal accurately to your amp. So if you want to have that control and your head unit offers that, you need to run 2 RCA cables from the head unit's RCA outputs, and then make sure you click this button on your amp here to make sure it's in 4-channel mode. For all other setups, you want to make sure your amplifier is in 2-channel mode. The last step would be to run your speaker wires that we already have set up into the terminals of our amp into the positive and negative terminals on your speakers. Since this is a 4-channel amplifier, we can run it into our 4 speakers, the 2 wakeboard speakers here, and the 2 kick panel speakers over here. And with that, you have successfully installed an amplifier into your UTV. The last thing to do is just turn on your UTV and make sure that your amp powers up. But hopefully this video showed you how easy it is to set up your amplifier in your UTV. But if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to our customer support tech team through phone or email. And check out the rest of the videos in our UTV install series. We'll see you guys in the next one.